Given all the talk about autonomous vehicles combining with electric vehicle technology to radically change the role of ICE vehicles, what type of scenarios should the Department of Transportation in Alaska be developing now and in the short term to reduce uncertainty and bracket its level of risk?
What does ICE stand for?
Internal combustion engine.
Oh, thank you. And this being an oil state? That's a good question. So what's the politically wise answer I can give you, which is in reality not too far off? Well, here's the deal. I come from Texas, and that is also an oil-producing state. So having said that, the one thing I do know at least is being pursued where I come from is this grids of electric charging vehicle. Who was it this morning? I believe it was you, who indicated that travels have been modified because of the availability of electric charging station. Now, I don't know if that is where you were going with the question or you were not, but the one thing is for certain, whether you were going to or you were not, I'm going to put the following plug in. Among the things that each and every state needs to be aware of and pursue is acceptance that this genie is out of the bottle. Is acceptance of the fact the means and methodologies of fueling our vehicle in the years ahead is no longer going to be based on fossil fuels. So how do we approach the question of EV charging station and prepare for it is what the states needs to be followed, in my view.
So the next question is kind of a follow-up for Ed, particular to Toyota and the question about the fuel and versus electric. Toyota has expended significant resources exploring the potential of hydrogen-powered vehicles. Do you see that this technology outcompeting electrically powered vehicles for AVs in the future?
So we see the possibility for many different powertrain configurations to propel our vehicles in the future. But that's true. We've done a lot of research into the fuel cell area for hydrogen-powered vehicles. And we have been selling a fuel cell or a hydrogen-powered model for over a year now, mostly in California, because that's where the infrastructure is for refueling. But we're also working with states or organizations on the East Coast to try and help support the infrastructure necessary for deployment there for a fuel cell. But we see a future of mixed powertrains, electric vehicles, plug-in electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and continuing, at least for the foreseeable future, of the internal combustion engine that, as we know it today. But we know that that mix will be changing in the future. We just aren't sure exactly how much and when that will be.
The next question is for Jeff. How can public agencies and the Department of Transportation or the municipality of Anchorage position themselves to reduce liability risks from implementation of this new technology?
Yeah, so
Switch on.
from a liability standpoint, most governments at least will have what we call immunity for discretionary decision making. So the initial policy decision makings are typically, you'll expect a government to have a level of immunity. But what you need to do once you've made that policy decision, there's what we distinguish between discretionary decision making and operational decision making, is once a plan is put in place, it must be carried out reasonably. And that will be probably the obligation of government. And as they get more involved in smart infrastructure, the question will be, are they implementing it reasonably at the right time, and it will potentially increase their exposure to possible liability by engaging in this type of technology, depending on your state's waiver of sovereign immunity.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Here's one of those big picture questions, and this one's for all three of you. So this is an interesting one. If one were a betting person, what odds would you give that autonomous vehicles will be deployed en masse or in a meaningful way by year 2025?
What was the question?
Autonomous vehicles in any meaningful volume by 2025.
I think, and I'll take the first stab at this, but I think Ed will probably have a better answer given his role in the industry. Is I don't think there'll be level 5 vehicles on the road in any meaningful fashion in 2025. I think what you'll see is a lot of, if we're going to start going to highly automated vehicles, it'll be level 4, but it will be restricted to certain areas like university campuses and specific areas that can be mapped out and used, maybe retirement communities where there's consistency there. I think you'll see a continuation of more level 2 technology and probably the introduction of starting to get level 3 technology. But to even if we were to start having level 5 vehicles developed today, it will take years and decades to get through the current vehicles we have on the road. People just own their vehicles for a long time. So even once we get to the point of manufacturers producing these cars, we're going to have to go through the process of getting all the old cars off the market, which will be a long process. So I do not think that, I think there's a lot greater chance that you'd see the Las Vegas Knights in the Stanley Cup next year than to have this technology.
So what he said. Jeff, you answered that well, and I pretty much agree with everything you've said. And I'm not a betting person, so, but I don't think there'll be any meaningful volume of, well, first of all, sort of defining that question of autonomous vehicles. So I had one of my slides where we talked about the different levels, the SAE levels. So SAE levels 0 through 2, the driver has to pay attention all the time, every time, just like we do today. Levels 3 through 5, that's where the vehicle can start to take over in some conditions or all of the conditions. I just don't see any meaningful volume available in 2025. Those vehicles that are high level, like level 4 and level 5, they may be out there in 2025, but not for the average person to go purchase, to use on a public roadway. There'll probably be very limited number of vehicles for use in a very specific area. And we might be able to experience riding in them, but not something that we could go purchase.
I also agree with what has been said, with one exception. We will be seeing level 4 automated shuttles in the transit industry, because simply transit has no other choice but to step up to the plate and deploy level 4 vehicles, as it's been in Las Vegas, as it's going to happen. It is happening right now in Jacksonville, Florida. Tampa is going to be following up soon, but limited to transit, and that's level 4. Although they can operate without the concierge, they can operate as they're doing in Minnesota on a joystick. It's the public acceptance and the comfort of the public that they have that concierge there, just like the elevator story. So level 4 will see, level 5, absolutely not.
All right, thank you. The next question is for Koorosh. And since you have a background from the public agency and the transportation consulting side, should we, as public agencies or as transportation professionals, be trying to guide the development of connected and automated vehicles to ensure better social equity?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, NAS is pursuing through NCHRP 202-11 and 12 exactly that question is addressing that. Also, we do have a MATS Municipality of Anchorage representation on that panel as well, or at least we did. Having said that, it is incumbent upon us, at least civil engineers, by the name of our profession, to be responsible to assist, not necessarily develop, guide the development of, because development is a governmental function. It's not a proprietary function of the private sector. It's a governmental function.
So just a quick follow-up, what type of action would you recommend would be beneficial at the local level?
At the local level? Well, let's talk about high top-down rather than bottom-up. To me, this is a top-down approach. Before the local level takes any action, the federal government has to lay down some ground rules as far as frameworks is concerned, because we simply do not want to have another toll road debacle on our hands for interoperability. So it's federal government, state government, regional government, or so-called local government, in that order.
All right, thank you. The next question is for Ed, and this one has a few elements to it. How advanced is Toyota's pedestrian bicycle detection avoidance system? How close does the person bike need to be for detection avoidance to be activated? How much time does it need to react? How does the vehicle make a decision between hitting another auto or endangering occupants versus bicycles or pedestrians?
So it's a great question, all those parts. I mean, you all want to know that. It doesn't have a simple answer because it depends on the circumstances. Our pedestrian detection and collision avoidance and automatic emergency braking are fairly well sophisticated in our first release of that in the vehicles that are available on the road today. Our next generation is about to be introduced on our new Corolla model. I'm not sure if we identify it as a Corolla wagon or a Corolla 5-door hatchback, but it's a new model that we'll be introducing, and it's the first one for our second generation of this technology. And it now detects pedestrians at night. It has some additional components to it that make it react better than or improved from our first generation. And it will react to pedestrians and bicyclists at speeds under 50 miles an hour. The assumption is that once you're traveling over 50 miles an hour, well, maybe not in an urban environment where there may be lots of pedestrians and bicyclists. So anyway, it does sense that up to speeds of 50 miles an hour. But I don't have any real concrete numbers to give you for speeds and seconds and that type of thing, because it just depends on a lot of factors.
All right.
The last one, though, that's a really important one. It's sort of the trolley question that I hear. How does the highly automated vehicle decide, to go to this bad situation versus another bad situation? So right now, all we say is that the driver needs to be fully aware, fully in control. The automation that's there is just to assist the driver that's paying attention all the time.
Yeah.
So we don't really have that sort of algorithm running in our vehicles, and we're still doing the research and development and testing work for higher levels of automation.
So the next question is for Jeff, and this is a pretty interesting one. Ed just mentioned the trolley problem. Maybe you can explain it a little bit more in detail, at least from a liabilities standpoint, and maybe you can enlighten us as to whom the vehicle should harm.
I didn't realize I was going to get into deep moral, philosophical questions, but no, I wrote a lengthy article on really how the law may not even incentivize the ethical programming of these cars, just due to how our legal system works and the duty to act first. You don't really have this obligation if you're not acting to do something. But I think that the trolley problem, and here's the problem when the trolley problem gets brought up. There are various problems. In general, you'd want the car to save humans over property. But that's very simple in a philosophy classroom. Where it gets more difficult is these cars aren't going to encounter hit this person or hit this car. It's likely going to be that there are risks of harm, and the car is going to be calculating this entire time where if it swerves a little bit this way, it increases the risk of harm to this accident potentially occurring, and if it swerves this way, then it increases the risk of harm of this other type of accident occurring. So it's not going to be where we get this, the car necessarily loses its brakes, it's got the shopping cart in front of it, it's got a baby carriage to the right, or it's got the shopping center to its left. It's more likely we're going to encounter risk of harm. And what that means is it's going to be a very difficult thing for engineers necessarily to think about and how to program the car. Where the trolley problem is really nice, though, is I think it's something that we do need to think about. We do need to think about at least what these cars will do when they do get into accidents and the decisions that the algorithm makes. But I think that's expecting OEMs to answer philosophical questions that we've never even came to a conclusion on, and determining principles of liability based on those decisions, I think will be different. But it will be that the OEMs will be second-guessed a lot more than a consumer will be, because we expect people to make bad decisions when they're actually in these must-happen accidents. We expect people to just not be right and not come up with good ethical plans. We won't have that same forgiveness, or the populace may not have that same forgiveness to a computer programmer who didn't take into account the ethics. Any of you guys have thoughts on this?
No, we'll leave it in you lawyers' hands.
All right, so the next question is for Koorosh, and maybe Ed can follow up a little bit too. How is the automotive industry and the government regulators how are they addressing vehicle security as vehicles become more connected and automated, and what kind of safeguards are currently being envisioned and implemented in the event of some sort of security breach?
The latest available information out of JPO, the Joint Program Office of the US DOT, is, quote, security by design. And that still remains true to this day. Furthermore, security management credentials is the one that is supposed to be covering us when it comes to these issues. The security aspect of it.
So, pretty important to ensure the security of these new technology vehicles. So, I think the primary area is the connectivity that I've been talking today, the vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure through DSRC. And that is going to be, the security of that system will be through that security credential management system that's been developed by the federal government in conjunction with OEMs as well as infrastructure participation to set this up and ensure the security. There's another aspect to the importance of the security, and that is to ensure privacy for all the drivers and occupants and the vehicles. So there's sometimes sort of opposing goals in this, but the security credential management system is engineered so that both those goals can be achieved. And there's other areas for potential security breach within the vehicle. I'm sure you're all aware of, I believe it was a Jeep product a couple of years ago that was hacked, where they took over some control of some of the features. So there has been an organization set up called the Auto ISAC. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but all OEMs are members of this organization, where we share any potential or real hacks or threats to any of our systems, so that we share that with each other immediately, so that we can all check and help resolve and prevent it in our vehicles. So we're looking to be more proactive, because even as our engineers work to make sure our systems are as robust as possible to prevent hacking, the hackers are always a half a step behind us, and sometimes they can get ahead of us. So we have a mechanism in place as an industry to share, so that once any hacking is recognized, we're all familiar with it, and we can all take action quickly to prevent any increased harm.
One thing that I think is going to be interesting and that governments need to do is, when our hacking laws, a lot of them were put on the books, they were assuming computer or financial crimes, and they weren't necessarily assuming that you were going to take control of a multi-thousand-pound vehicle and drive it and cause harm. And so one thing that, from a government standpoint, that states will need to consider and the federal government will need to consider is, how do we address and ensure that the punishment for hacking a vehicle is actually tied to the fact that you could cause serious harm. We're not talking about stealing bank account numbers or intercepting private information from a computer. So that's one aspect, just from a hacking standpoint, the governments need to be looking at.
Good point. Good point.
All right, thank you. The next question is for Ed Bradley. So recognizing that you're working for Toyota in North America, are there auto markets worldwide in other parts of the world that are driving or mandating Toyota's autonomous vehicle development ahead of North American efforts?
Great question. So the research and development and work that's going on for automated and connected vehicles is happening all over the world. The European market, Japan, Australia, as well as here. I don't think there's any area or region that is necessarily ahead of the others. There's a little bit of a different approach taken in each area to resolve this problem of crashes and fatalities. And I think there's much more international work going on to understand what's going on in the other regions, so we can all kind of learn from each other to help accelerate the technology faster and more safely.
Thank you. Next question is for Jeff. So this is regarding products liability. Are the auto manufacturers all on board with this concept? It seems that Tesla may have backed away from sole support of product liability that they originally supported.
No, I would say we've had 3 manufacturers come out and say that they'll accept liability. We had Volvo said it, I think Mercedes said it, and I think Google did. That gave at least a public statement, but we don't even know what that means. Remember, fault's not binary. That means there are probably, in most accidents, multiple parties that will share responsibility. So we'll see when lawsuits start to arise what those the CEOs and the officials of those companies actually meant when they said that they'll accept liability for accidents caused by their technology. But in general, I think at level 2, I think you're having this problem where the technical responsibility, I think you're seeing Tesla push back now and make many statements saying, the consumer is misusing this product, they're not paying attention, we've told them to pay attention. And I think from a technical standpoint, they're absolutely right. And then the question for them will be how hard they want to fight it if these lawsuits start coming. And I think that the lawsuits that will really test Tesla will be when third parties start to get significantly injured by the misuse of the consumers. Because I think it will be hard. Remember, I had those categories of plaintiffs. I think it will be hard for the operator in the car to stand before a jury and make a claim, but it will be a lot easier for some third party that was harmed to make that claim to a jury and make that claim to a court that Tesla didn't do enough. But I think most are going to resist products liabilities application and the shift of liability from the traditional driver to the manufacturer of the technology for many of the reasons I said, which is this is an obligation a manufacturer of a company's never, ever would have ever undertaken historically, to be responsible for products and design that far down the road. Typically, you're responsible for the design when the car is sold to the consumer. And then after that, the only responsibility is if you had a bad design, you might have to recall the product, but you don't actually have this continual obligation. So I think it will be resisted, and it will be up to really the court system to determine it, and then potentially Congress or the legislatures to step in.
Excellent, thank you. I have one more big picture question for the three of you, and then we'll open up to questions to the audience. So in what ways, if any, does Uber being required to stop autonomous vehicle operations in Arizona affect the timeline for autonomous vehicles to be used across the country?
Yeah, so that the crash itself impacted our company. Just knowing that happened, we stopped all on-road, public roadway testing of our higher levels in our engineering and prototype vehicles, and sort of reassessing, sort of thinking about what happened in the Google crash and how are we addressing scenarios that might come up for us. So I think it is probably I think your question had to do with the industry. How was the industry reacting? I think it might have caused like a healthy pause for everybody to sort of regroup, rethink this, and maybe do a little more homework before we put these higher levels of prototype vehicles out there on the public roadways. Because for us, it is critical that we don't do anything to harm potential public acceptance of any of the new technology. We don't want people to be fearful of higher levels of automation in the vehicle. We don't want people to be fearful that they're being tracked, that the government will know where they're going, and we don't want people to be fearful that their vehicle might be hacked. So all of these areas are pretty important to us. We want to make sure that we don't cause any concern by the public, and whatever actions we do will help actually improve people's impression about the new technology for the future.
I would second that and say that there was probably a gut check by a lot of the companies, and I think that's probably good. Last thing we need is for there to be a lot of these accidents where they're almost treated like airplane crashes, both with the reporting and the federal oversight at every one of these crashes. And that will help or hurt public acceptance of this technology and the trust that could be built. Because even though that same week that there was the Uber accident, there were 9 other people, I think, that died in that same week, I think maybe in Arizona, pedestrians from accidents that we never heard of. So every one of these accidents where we have an automated vehicle that gets in an accident, that's going to be almost like a shark bite problem, where people will think that sharks are everywhere because the media reports the accident so much more than they report other accidents. And I really believe that automated vehicles are probably going to cure this public health crisis and open up so many more benefits to society. So I think the pause was good.
The pause is definitely good, it's healthy, but how can we use this time in a wise way? This will delay whatever the time frame was plus 1 year, no question. Because the feds usually take about a year to put their reports out, and none of these manufacturers are going to be willing to take the chance of getting out there again without having NTSB's reports out. Having said that, how can we use this time as government, as regulators, as feds, as states, regional level? We can start our planning. We can start our planning wisely. Again, remember, we were late in this game. We cannot catch up, or at least partially catch up.
I'd like to open it up to the audience for any questions you might have for any of the panelists. So feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions.
Somebody else is. I heard some discussion about kind of engineering, how engineers are going to make decisions about programming for different situations. But as I understand it, the way the industry is going is that the companies are going to deploy AI. And the AI is going to be based on how it's been trained and what it learns after it's been deployed. And the models may be updated, but it isn't going to be engineers writing software who are going to be primarily responsible for the actions taken in the car, 5 to 10 years from now. So I guess my question is, when we make a lot of forward-looking policy, kind of projections about how we deal with things in the future, how we've done things in the past in terms of liability based on, an engineering decision, it just seems like the basis is totally different going forward. But I guess I would just ask for your comments on that.
That's an excellent question you raised. That's what we call the future proofing. None of these documents that folks prepare, entities prepare, are dead documents. They're all living documents. They're all supposed to be updated. They're all supposed to be new versions of them to be released. There's no difference here. You have comprehensive plans, you have thoroughfare plans, you have traffic and transportation engineering plans, zoning and subdivision plans, whatever plans you have out there in your regions under different various things. All of them are living documents. As technology advances, as AI advances, those can always be modified. We cannot just do nothing saying things are going to change.
I think artificial intelligence will be used in the future to help enhance some of the systems, but the basic safety foundation will already be designed in. It won't be used as a supplement to the safety aspect of any systems. It'll probably be more initially used to help in terms of customer satisfaction, help customize sort of how the customer is comfortable using the vehicle. But I don't think it will be foundational in the future for any of the safety technology that gets introduced in the vehicle incrementally.
Yeah, and I think from a liability standpoint, I don't know if the AI can be blamed. Just from a practical standpoint, what we look for a defendant or someone who could potentially be liable, we're looking for someone who's got money in their pocket. And artificial intelligence, I think what you may see a shift from courts trying to adjust, and there's going to be a language barrier, I think, for a lot of courts to try to understand what artificial intelligence is, especially because A lot of your judges tend to be older, and that's not to say that older people don't know AI as much. They're just not as familiar with how the system's actually going to learn. But I don't think it's something that I think the companies will still have an obligation to monitor the AI and ensure that if it makes a bad decision, that decision's corrected fairly quickly, and that other AIs, at least they can correct it throughout the whole system.
Are there any other audience questions?
So I'm so excited about over-the-air updates and the opportunities that we have to maintain software and some of these equipments without having to bring them into a shop or maintain them on our own. Yet rural communities or communities without power could have sort of a disadvantage there. So, you know, I guess kind of worst case, think Puerto Rico or something like that, where if the whole grid is down, the system is down, is there a backup to kind of sending out an over-the-air update or anything like that when maybe you're in a rural community that doesn't have good connectivity, or in a emergency response scenario where you need to change maps or change information without power?
So I can't, it's a great question, and relevant and valid for those areas, but to the best of my knowledge, we don't have over-the-air updates for any aspect of the vehicle, even like comfort and convenience or our audio system or navigation. So I don't know what our policy would be in the future as we talk about higher levels of technology. But there would be, I understand there's needs for it for certain areas, but I don't know what our policy would be.
That was addressed to vehicle manufacturer, or that was addressed to policy as a whole? If I recall correctly, I saw an ad on TV the other day that this lady drove into a creek. I think it may have been a General Motors system in a rural area. The operator says, "Don't worry, I'm staying with you until help arrives." If General Motors has a plan and program of that nature, I'm sure Toyotas of the world also do. Or maybe we are not aware of it because Toyotas are so big, just like my own company. I don't know what my company does, not every aspect of it. But regarding the rural areas underserved, the digital divide, to me, is the most important thing. We keep on talking about smart cities. Cities are not smart. People are smart. People are the ones who make the cities function smart. Addressing digital divide is foundational to all these things before we talk AV or CV or CAVs in rural areas. You got to get them connected first and foremost.
And I think for us to reap the full benefits from autonomous vehicle from a safety standpoint, we have to address the rural communities. The state with the largest or most deaths from road accidents per capita in the country is Wyoming. I think Montana's third. Most accidents that kill people tend to happen in rural communities. So I think for us to have a substantial impact on the fatalities, we're going to have to address rural communities. I think most accidents will happen in cities, but you're not traveling at a speed enough to typically cause accidents like you do in rural communities. So I don't think we'll reap all our safety benefits till we start to solve problems like that and solve how do we get these cars in rural communities and get them to people to use on those roads.
Great. I think that wraps up the second panel portion. Let's get a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, Jeff, Ed, and Koorosh. Appreciate you guys making it up here for this. So I've got just a few closing remarks that I'd like to make before you guys all head out for your nice, beautiful Alaska weekend. You know, it's been a journey over the last 8 months getting this together. And we've had a ton of support, not only from the folks that have been on our committee, but from sponsors from the local agencies. from all over. So I just want to quickly acknowledge those folks. But I have this picture, and Ed had a similar picture to this in his presentation. If you can see, so the one on the top was taken around a similar time as this one. The one on the top left is the top right. So we've got, a deluxe horse buggy on the left, and then we got the first Model A. Model A is coming out of the Ford factory there. So this was around the same time frame. There weren't too many of these on the road. These were all over the place. This is today. This is one of GM's deluxe models, SUVs, and this is GM's, I believe this is the Cruise in their factory being manufactured today. So I just kind of want to show how quickly the transition from this to this is going to happen from this to this. So I hope all of the presentations today kind of enlightened you and gave you some ideas and some inspiration to want to move forward here locally and support policy regarding autonomous vehicle and connected vehicle technology. So a few acknowledgements I would like to make. I really appreciate Mark being here and doing our opening remarks, Tracy making it up from Nevada, Jay from Minnesota, Abby from Kittleson making it all the way from Florida. I'm sure that was a bunch of flights to get over here. Koorosh from Stantec, and thank you so much, Stantec, for having Koorosh fill in later as we were planning this. Ed Bradley, you came from DC. I'm sure that's a ton of flights. And Jeff, you told me that was 3 flights to get here. So very much appreciated, not only by our committee, but I'm sure by everybody here that you were able to make it all the way to Alaska to talk to us about all of your experience throughout the years with this technology. The other folks I'd like to acknowledge here, and these sponsors really made it possible. These are our gold level sponsors, AMATS, Jacobs, my company, for giving me the time to be able to do this for you. Michael Baker, CRW, and Stantec. As I mentioned, Stantec was able to get Koorosh up here for us. Kinney Engineering, HDL, Lounsbury at the silver level, and then R&M, HDR, and a special shout out to Kittleson and Associates for providing Abby's her travel and her stay up here as well. It's very much appreciated. So thank you so much to all of our sponsors. And lastly, the most important people that I want to acknowledge here today are these people on this list up here. They've been working tirelessly during their lunches, their weekends, at nights, putting this all together for you. So, I'm standing right here. I'd like to acknowledge Matt Edge for handling all the presenter coordination. Connor, back in the back corner over there, handling the audio visual and coordinating with our audio visual tech back there. Jim Potts, who's a mentor of mine over at Jacobs, for handling a lot of the fundraising for this. Sean Baskey, who handled the website in coordination with ITE Alaska section. Trevor Strait, you did such a great job handling the registration and getting those emails back and forth. I really appreciate your help on this. Robert Nemad for handling some of the presenter logistics, and also Lisa and Vivian's support with the planning process and getting ITS Alaska involved in this. I really appreciate that. And a quick special shout out to Jim Amundsen and Val Rader, who provided resources and let us meet over at DOT Central Region for our regular meetings. So really appreciate that. Let's get a round of applause for all of those folks in the room.